Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're really happy to have you here today to talk about how to proactively manage technical debt. This is something at the LDX3 conference in London we talked about. We had such a good vibe and such an engaged topic. We thought we'd bring three new other panelists back and we could talk about this. This is an engineering and action panel created in partnership with Harness. Panel is going to last about 40 minutes. We want to be as interactive as possible, so please add your questions in. So we're going to have a link right there. We do questions. You can add them here or you can add them in the Lead Dev Slack community, and we will have the discussion here. And then also there's probably questions that won't be able to fit in this time, so we will continue the conversation in the webinar Q&A channel in the Slack. So I think it's a great topic, and just let's get things started. I'm Jennifer Riggins. I'm a tech journalist, including for Lead Dev. And today I am joined by Preetha, Darren, and Adam. And so I just want to kick off by asking you to introduce yourselves. And then I would like, from a score of 1 to 10 from each of you, how important do you think most enterprises, and talking like high level, think technical debt is, and then how important do you think it should be? Preetha, do you want to go first?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. So I'm Preetha. I'm the principal engineer and I work in Barclays. I've been programming for about 2 decades now. So tech debt is a familiar territory for me. So in terms of ratings, I would say enterprise and orgs look at 2 in terms of tech debt. Whereas the focus should be between 7 and 8. That's what I would like to call out. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Darren, do you want to go next?
Yeah, my name is Darren Lewis. I'm a senior principal engineer at Experian. I've been there about 10 years. I've been an engineer for nigh on 20 years now. So getting a bit long in the tooth now. In terms of enterprises, I think they probably value tech debt around a 5, I would guess, from my experience. I think it probably needs to be positioned around a 7 or 8, I would say. But yeah, really pleased to be here. Have a good conversation.
Okay, Adam.
Hi there. My name's Adam Mariano. I'm a field CTO with Traceable, who recently merged with Harness. So I'm also part of Harness, and was a Marine for a long time, a U.S. Marine for a long time, where I worked on jets and then became a cybersecurity expert. And since then, in the civilian sector, have been a security person. So I'm kind of infiltrating this engineer world with security stuff, but I've also led engineering teams both in security and software. So when it comes to enterprises, especially large enterprises, I think that I would give them almost a negative number. They love when things stay the same when it's outside of engineering. If everything could just stay exactly like it was the day they joined, they'd be super happy. Me personally, I think that tech debt is a thing that we should put it like a 2 or a 3 unless we align it with progress. And then when we align it with progress, it should be a 10.
Very interesting. And of course, the military would never, and the government would never have technical debt.
No.
They're so revolutionary from the tech side. And of course, those in the audience, if you want to, in the chat, comment what you think at your organization, maybe mention the industry or sector. We'd love to hear from you what you think is the priority right now, and maybe also to ground our work, maybe why you were compelled to join this discussion today. So thank you all for joining, and an extra shout out to the Slack community, because I maybe asked the Slack community's technical debt conversation or channel for ideas for questions. So I definitely want to say thank you to everyone for their participation in the Lead Dev Slack as well. Just to bring it full circle with that, Nick in that Slack had said, what would change if we talked about technical maintenance the same way we talk about maintaining infrastructure? So I think that question unto itself is a really good way to kick off by defining what each of you believe is technical debt. Because it's not as maybe obvious as financial debt. Adam, do you want to go first?
Sure. And I, for a long time, I used to fight the idea of technical debt, and I would go around telling people there's no such thing. Those were decisions that were made at a time when that was all the information, all the resources that they had, and they made the best decision possible. And you have to have some respect and faith in the people that came before you. But it does mean something. When you say technical debt, people understand what you're talking about is the state of a system that was decided before you were touching it or a while ago, and now things have changed. And so the way I look at technical debt in that frame of reference of maintenance is that you should at any given time evaluate the state of the system that you're working on or the state of your company or whatever it is and see what is going to be best to change first. And that's kind of how you prioritize these things is what needs to be changed. What I don't believe in is the idea of kind of knocking over Legos or knocking over blocks just for the sake of knocking them over. If something is functioning, even if it's not functioning exactly like you would want it to today, leave it in place until you're ready to replace it with something else. Which again is a weird thing for a security person to say because they just love to, tell everybody to stop doing something without having a replacement.
Okay, Darren, same question. What's technical debt by your definition?
I think for me, technical debt falls into sort of two categories. I think you can have conscious or unconscious technical debt. As an example, you might make a conscious decision to take a shortcut, put something off to meet a delivery date, and that's a pragmatic, conscious decision. And they're not necessarily bad decisions all the time, as long as you circle back around to actually, fixing or tackling whatever you've put on hold. I think where it's slightly more dangerous is the unconscious technical debt, where you're sort of sleepwalking into it, you're gradually building it up over time, and then it gets to a critical mass and you're technically sort of bankrupt, and then you have your big rewrites, replatforms. So I think that's the way in my head I separate it. I don't know what other people think to that sort of approach.
I want to ask some follow-ups on that. So is conscious versus unconscious objective or subjective? So are people of different maybe levels of experience or different decision-making levels, are they more aware or less aware of this subconscious or unconscious technical debt? Or is it something that varies, or could be more strategically or effectively changed, the awareness of the technical debt based on some sort of communication or process or tool to give insights?
I think from my point of view, I think as you get more senior and as you get, well, not even senior, as you get more experience, you're more in tune to what constitutes technical debt or not. And, there's a difference between technical debt and also just writing it a different way. Different people write code in different ways. That's fine. And you need to be careful in distinguishing what is actually a debt versus what is just a slightly different way of achieving the same thing. And I think speaking personally, as I've got more experience, I'm more in tune to it, I think. And that distinguishing sort of determination between, person A versus person B might do it completely different ways. But then as I've got more senior, thinking more so in terms of business impacts, that's where I really sort of focus what is technical debt. Is it when it's having an impact to the business, that's when it becomes a debt. If it's something, you may write it slightly differently, it's not really debt for me, it's just a different way of doing things.
Although in this age of the rise of platform engineering, one of the main reasons is because a lot of people on the tech side do not have insight into the business side and vice versa. So maybe that will help bridge that gap. Preetha, does technical debt have a specific definition at Barclays? Do you look at it as having a specific meaning?
So Barclays being a large organization, different teams have got attributed different names. but I would like to give like my personal view on how I'm advocating for it. So I like to use a bit of analogies here to make it very clear. So if you're having like a very high-end car, a very sophisticated piece of machinery, you would do like an ongoing maintenance. You wouldn't make it run out of fuel, or you wouldn't skip MOTs or things like that. And those are called essential maintenance activities. So that applies to a software system as well. So you just like make sure that you're doing the regular stuff, but make sure the software is running smoothly and not impacting customers. So the more we neglect those activities, then your debt accrues. So this is a conscious decision that if say I'm not doing a patching this month, I'm making a conscious decision that I've got to do double patching next month. And that accrues. It's more like the financial debt of you taking a mortgage. You've got to repay your debt on a regular basis. So these analogies, if you apply it to the software system, it helps you think like doing little things often lets you have a more smoother running system that is easy to maintain, easy to upgrade, easy to sustain. Whereas if you keep putting things, okay, I'll fix it later, your sophisticated machinery is going to stop at some point in the motorway at a critical junction, causing a traffic block or something. And that applies to a software system.
Yeah.
So the cost of change is just going to keep rising the more we neglect things. So that's kind of the analogy I use to explain the terminology.
Wow. And I think that's true that we as humans love to learn through metaphors. And I think technical debt does lend itself. When you were talking about the maintenance of like a vehicle, I immediately thought of the check engine light, and maybe there needs to be, we need a common definition. Like wordly mapping is very good at helping create this common language among different stakeholders, like just a single sheet of paper. And we need this common definition within our organization or within our team or our division of technical debt to then be able to set a check engine light of, oh, we've hit this threshold of the cost of change has gone too high. Has anyone quantified, how do you get that conversation started with leadership that you can, how are you measuring? I see you nodding, Adam, so I feel like I'm gonna let you take this one first. How are you measuring your technical debt to be able to then argue that a percentage of that needs to go to that, not new features?
This is the struggle that most security and engineering teams have, is how can you convince the business or leadership or whomever it is that controls resources that we should forego an improvement to customer experience in the interest of making things run more smoothly in the back end. And really, the effective way that I've done that, I was at PayPal for a while and Salesforce for a minute. And the way that we would communicate that is kind of based on what Preetha was saying, is like how quickly can you change? So it's not really a question of, if it, I've had this argument with several different chief security officers, and there's one in manufacturing that ran a large, very large worldwide business that had tons of, food and chemical manufacturings. And her point was, we can't shut this down ever. I was like, well, kind of. It will shut down. It will break. And there will be a day that it will stop working like you want it to work. So either choose the timing of that or choose to be surprised by it. And so that's kind of the message that I take to leadership is not, I'm not trying to scare anybody, not trying to, sow fear, uncertainty, and doubt. However, we should choose the date and time that we want this to go down, or we want it to go wrong, or we want to make this change. And really, what I think is most compelling to, especially those that are resource driven or leadership, is to show gains in productivity or show gains in your ability to change. So if we do this change, or we replatform this or refactor, XYZ, that will give us the ability to change this much faster. So our velocity of change and our velocity of adjustment is going to increase.
So connecting technical debt to maybe DORA metrics like change failure rate, release
Correct.
time. Okay. Interesting. Preetha, you had mentioned in our talking before that there's some way you can visualize technical debt to try to make it more of a priority, because it's quite an abstract term.
Yeah. I agree with the point. Accelerate metrics are a good way of like articulating the cost of change. But when it comes to explaining it at a lower level, like engineers trying to explain like a piece of software needs to change the product and other like non-engineering disciplines, there is always a disconnect. What people see outside of engineering as a small change doesn't always be a small change when it comes to the code. And oftentimes it's like, why is it taking so long? And it's very difficult to articulate what the problem is. So I did an exercise with one of my teams. I'm trying to share my screen, so I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that technical, it works.
Mhm.
So,
Absolutely. And I think what you're saying is true, that especially if the more junior an engineer or anyway, they may have a hard time articulating or advocating for working on technical debt, which
yeah. So I think this is what I'm trying to share. Just please bear with me. But this is what I used to call as an iceberg code challenge, where the juniors engineer can say like, okay, this is the problem I'm trying to solve, but then they wouldn't know why it's a problem. So what I have done is, so I'm just still struggling with the share buttons. I'm not used to.
okay, yes, we all have issues with that. That's okay. I think you should have permission to share, right, Scott, in the sharing part. And so walk us through it while we get it loaded. So a visualization for
Yeah.
that.
So let me try this again. Modified. You see this okay?
We can see it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So this is what I used to, when I have these conversations with engineers, this is what I say. So we did like in one of the projects I had worked earlier on, we didn't have like the right status codes passed along from APIs. So people didn't think it was really a problem, but nobody understood why there was a problem. So when engineers tried to explain it to non-engineering community, it was a very difficult conversation because people just didn't get it. But the moment we drew this diagram and we said like, okay, this is what you see at the top, the tip of the iceberg is the incorrect practice, which contributes to the technical debt. And the consequence is what's underlying underneath the surface. So if you can start putting things in that narrative, and finally talks about like the customer experience, the developer experience, the whole experience around debugging issues, because you don't know what is the true state of the system. So that's when people started thinking, okay, now I get it. Okay, what do we do to make it better? So sometimes it just takes a few iterations of getting the mental models right, aligned with the right set of people to prioritize the work. And sometimes you think like it might take a long time, but some things are like really simple. Could be like a small change to fix a number of problems, but it's making sure people understand what the problem is, what is it that you're trying to solve. And this helps articulate a lot of the message to non-engineering folks and even to senior execs on why things take a long time and why it is important to do the essential maintenance so your vehicle doesn't stop at a critical point, or even like stop it having fatal accidents. So when you're dealing with highly complex critical systems, it's important that we are on top of all these things.
Mhm.
So I'll stop sharing.
Absolutely. And we will also, Preetha, I invite you when we're done the call, if you can share it in the Slack webinar Q&A so that everyone can access it as well. That's a very useful tool to reuse. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, Darren, do you have anything else to add about advocating for technical debt in a way that product leadership will listen and maybe prioritize, especially tools? I know we have a mix of managers and engineering leadership, but sometimes they are the ones that have to provide the tools to their engineers and the psychological safety to come up and talk about it.
Yeah, sure. I think, from my experience, if you're talking to leaders or talking to product people, you have to speak their language. You know, if you're a techie, you can say, hey, I want to do this thing. And if you're speaking to another techie, they might intrinsically go, yep, that makes perfect sense. I understand why you're going to do that, and go ahead and do it. Whereas if you're in a business, you need to articulate to the relevant stakeholders, why is it you are working on this technical thing rather than working on something that's going to generate revenue, reduce costs, whatever it may be. So I think learning to speak their language is a really important part of that conversation in terms of getting buy-in, and also articulating business value of why you want to tackle a certain piece of technical debt. So it might be, we're going to spend a sprint working on something in our CI/CD pipeline that then will mean that we can release changes faster from that point forwards. And we estimate within, 2 or 3 sprints, we'll have got that time back by the time we've saved. That's a really easy way to frame it for someone that's non-technical to understand, number one, what the technical thing is that you're doing, but also number two, the business value for why you're doing it. Because ultimately, while you're doing technical debt work, you may not be working on a new product feature or something to engage a customer. So you need to entice people to understand, oh yeah, I want you to do that because that's going to help me, that's going to help the business. And that's how I found framing it works quite well. But that's a learned skill, especially for us techies that may not be the best with the softer skills. That's something that takes practice, I find.
Also, it's hard to measure work sometimes. Let's be honest, estimates are still a quagmire unto itself. We have a question from the audience, from the Slack community. Thank you, Tal, for this. Is tech debt different from keeping the lights on and ongoing upkeep? What falls under each? What about security vulnerabilities? When is tech debt causing a security vulnerability? It feels like, Adam, you might want to answer that one first with your back.
Loaded question. I see a difference between tech debt and keeping the lights on, in that when you look at something that's tech debt, it's a decision that you may want to change. Like, you don't look at something that's functioning well like you want it to as tech debt. I think that's just kind of the way that we view things. When something becomes problematic, or you wish it was different, or you want it to be different, that's when we start to consider it as tech debt. Otherwise, it's a decision that was made. If you made the decision yesterday, you're much less likely to see it as tech debt. But if the decision was made 3 years ago, then you're much more likely to think of it as such. And to that point, the day that you used a given library or call to a certain service when you're coding, the day that you did that, it probably didn't have any vulnerabilities and everything was up to date and it was fine. But that's the nature of security patching and security vulnerabilities, is that they don't start as vulnerabilities. They start as well-made software, and they become vulnerable once people discover how they could be exploited. And so I think that's a portion of the upkeep that has to happen, but I don't think it necessarily fits into that whole tech debt conversation. I would say, though, that your ability to change quickly, again, I love that idea that Preetha brought up. The ability to change quickly is really what keeps you from that situation where it's difficult to patch or difficult to change something.
Okay. And then when we're talking about, like, in different industries, does technical debt matter more or less? Like, maybe the financial industry, is there a way that it becomes more challenging because of that? The restrictions, regulations, are there regulatory concerns around technical debt?
I think I'll take that question. So I think regulatory concerns are applicable for every change that we do, like in a regulated industry. So not just Barclays. So previous companies I've worked were also regulated industries. So they apply for every change. So whether it's keeping the lights on, doing essential maintenance, the regulatory norms have to be met at all times, because we have to be audited at regular intervals. So this brings a new challenge. This is one of the reasons we could get into the habit of let's do it later because it's too much of governance overhead to make it happen. But what we don't understand is sometimes this procrastination could lead to additional governance because things are not meeting the regulatory standards. So we end up in this catch-22 situation where we can't do the change because there is governance, and then the governance exists because we didn't do the change in the first place. So it's like a chicken and egg situation. Which do we unpick first? Do we fix the cycle, break the cycle of making the changes more regular, and then get rid of the governance overhead? Or do we take a risk and reduce the governance? So this is always the conversation that we need to have with business. And the non-engineering world is different. In a regulated industry, engineering is just a small part of the organization. And then there is a lot of layers that we have to work around or work with in collaboration. So this is why I tell my teams, collaborate often with different parties to understand like what is their concern, what is the risk they are worried about, and then make sure that we are taking that into consideration when we are building the software. So we get the questions answered, and everybody is happy and we progress. So yeah, the cost of change is one of the biggest constraints that we have to work with when it comes to a governance perspective.
So I think maybe it's a good idea to pivot from trying to define and advocate for the importance of technical debt to actually creating a strategy around technical debt. How do you decide what to refactor, when to rewrite, when to simply live with technical debt because you can't fix it all and everything eventually becomes it? How do you actually get strategic? Darren, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, sure. Something that helps me at least a little bit, and something I'm actually in the middle of rolling out with some of my teams at the moment is, every component in your system ideally should have a lifetime. What do you want to do with it in the short term? What do you want to do with it medium and long term? Because then you can start to make pragmatic decisions of once you've measured, however that might be, what the technical debt is in each component, you can say, okay, right, we're going to get rid of this in 6 months. Let's just leave it and move on to something maybe more impactful. Or you might say, okay, right, actually, we're keeping this for a long time. We do need to pay this down, or at least, tackle it a little bit. So I think having a bit of a roadmap as to, what the likely lifetime is of the component with the technical debt is, and then also pulling it back to that business value side of things, I think helps really sort out what needs to be tackled and in what order. So that's what I think helps me figure it out in my head, the best approach.
There's a question from the audience I definitely wanted to share. What is the formal process you take in your organization? So that can be any of you because you all work at technically backed organizations. What is the formal process you take to assess tech debt items to ensure that it gains the right priority for remediation and does not introduce any risks? That's super interesting.
Yeah. Can I talk about that one first? So interesting that introduction of risk is something that we would like. And there's a bunch of different crude ways to say this, but basically you don't always get what you want. And every change is going to introduce risk no matter what. There's also risk in not changing things. And so I think it's actually the balance of risk is are you going to be de-risking some aspect as much as it's going to cause new risk? In larger organizations, whether it be the military or Salesforce or whatever, I've seen those formal processes, and what they basically consist of, whether they're effective or not is a whole different story, but what they consist of is some attempt at turning then the subjective understanding of what the risk is into some kind of objective measurable thing. I don't ever remember seeing that happen effectively, but it at least introduces some reference point that you can go back to and talk about. One thing that is possible is looking at the upkeep of the current state and the upkeep of the future state, and whether or not those are balanced out. If you can reduce upkeep of a certain thing, then that's, better. I've been in organizations that are still running on software systems that were built in the late 90s, early 2000s. And the risk-based, and if you want to talk tech, that's huge, right? You're running on software that's older than some of the people that work for you. But trying to replace those in an effective manner without interrupting business is difficult and sometimes not possible. And so the decision has been made that the risk to the business is less in keeping the, 1992 IBM database around as opposed to changing to something new. I would like that not to be the case, but sometimes that is the right decision.
I think I'll probably follow that up a little bit in terms of like setting the culture in a company is really important as well in terms of how you want to tackle technical debt. Like no one is going to come to you and just say fix tech debt. You need to be able to, breed a culture where, you the simplest way I like to think about it is leave the code better today than it was yesterday. And you can do little things, as you're working on any feature, whatever it might be, maybe tidy up a little thing here, or maybe change a little thing there. But you want it to be like habitual, because that's an easy and a pragmatic way to tackle it without it being a huge inconvenience. And also you can slip stuff under the radar, which also helps with the product people. You can say it's a 5-point story and you take half a point just to do some tech debt. So that helps. But where that doesn't work is where you get much bigger pieces of technical debt. So, architectural technical debt is generally a much bigger sort of problem to solve that requires coordination across multiple teams. So that's when it does become almost like a mini project or a project in its own right. I think trying to balance out the team being independent and self-organizing and just tackling stuff is a really positive way to do it. And also that helps people learn how to have those conversations. If you're getting all of your engineers learning how to speak to their product counterparts and their stakeholders around how to articulate why they should be doing something, if they are talking about it open and honestly, then that's only going to serve them better when they move up and progress through their career to then start targeting the bigger changes. You need 6 months, or you need to completely migrate from platform A to platform B. That's going to help you hone your skills and articulate the value with some of these things.
How would you define the culture you're trying to promote there? This is a very nebulous term. Culture.
Yes. I suppose almost self-sufficiency. If you see something that, say your unit tests coverage is 20%, you go, okay, I see that, I want to fix that. So you bump it up with each change you make in that system, and over time it increases. Or you maybe empower the teams to say, okay, right, this is causing a problem. We had an incident last week and we didn't have a unit test that would have caught it. Again, tie it back to business value. Okay, right, we're going to fix that. So making the teams want to care about it, but also trying to engage your stakeholders for them to also care about it. What is the impact of not having unit test coverage in terms of incidents or defects or customer detriment, especially in regulated industries? That's a big one. I find that helps. You can't get it right, especially in big organizations. The number of as the number of teams grows, it is harder to maintain that culture, I think. And also different cultures are appropriate in different points in time. So for example, if you're in a startup, you might not really care about tech debt right now. You just need to hit the delivery date. So you might be, accruing technical debt left, right, and center. But if you don't get this product out on the day, the company ceases to exist. So tech debt is the least of your issues. Whereas if you're in a, well-regulated, established enterprise, you have a different viewpoint on what's acceptable with technical debt as well. And the cultures will be different depending on your sort of unique circumstances.
Can I come in with like yeah, and I want to say something ugly that not to disagree with you. I actually agree with you, Darren, but I'm going to say it in a very ugly way. People say that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? But incentives snack on culture all day. Like you can have whatever kind of culture you want, but if you don't incentivize people with either pay, rewards, progression, and things like that, it won't happen. And I think that's not just true at the individual level, it's true at the organizational level. So if the business doesn't incentivize the engineering team to tackle things like this, then they won't. And so you have to build into performance reviews, bonuses, promotions and things like that. You have to build in incentives, or else people, the Boy Scouts of the world, the Dudley Do-Rights of the world will go after the good thing and the right thing, but everybody else won't unless you incentivize it properly, which is the other side of culture. Are you actually feeding people for doing the right thing, or are they doing it despite your best efforts?
Because
To add on that, in terms of the process, I think the question, and it also looks into the other question that's come in the chat. So in terms of process, in places I have worked, we used to have a tracker, like a backlog of things that needs addressing. So in larger organizations, this could be somebody consuming our services, or it could be customer impacted. So because of the nature of the problems we get from different sources, we used to build that list of problem records, and we used to attribute SLAs to each of them. So if it's customer impacting, obviously it's got a priority one, and it's got a specific target dates by when you have to address the problems. So it helps a little bit with the prioritization. So it's not technical debt, but it's impacting, it is impacting customers. So it's naturally a product issue, or we didn't anticipate a specific scenario. So it ties into all that we do for the customer, because at the end of the day, customer is king. We build services for the customer, and that's who's bringing the business or bringing in the money. So if they're not happy, it's not helpful. So it's trying to visualize things from a customer perspective and making sure like we're able to prioritize the problems that they have really helps. And by customers, I mean everybody, the end users, the other team that consumes our products, the developers who work on our system. So everybody is a consumer of the software. So prioritize according to their need, and that helps us manage the workload better. So definitely having a formal process helps in keeping things on track.
I agree, and I think it echoes back to what Adam was saying, that if you want technical debt to be a priority in an organization, it has to be part of the job description. Because if not, those traditionally from the most minoritized communities are the ones, especially women, more likely to do it. And then when it comes to performance appraisals, which should not be annual, but that's another talk. When it comes to that, then they're working on things that is not directly tied to their job description, and it penalizes the people that are doing this good work. So another culture point that we need to put up is to be a good steward, a code steward for the future engineers in the organization, which it may be you may be the one having to deal with this technical debt. You may be building your own technical debt. So it's good for everyone. So
like there is another aspect I want to add to this is like the budgeting. So often we hear teams don't have time to address technical issues because of financial constraints. But then like when you budget for your work, if you know how much problems you have, that's like you have to allocate budget to fix the problems. So it's like, again, going back to my car analogy, you're going for an MOT and you haven't done your regular maintenance. You've got to be prepared for footing a bill to upkeep this vehicle. So it's similar to that. So if we can measure how many issues you have in the system, then when you budget it, you allocate like 30% of your budget to address issues, and then 60% for enhancements or things like that. So it helps in better planning, financial planning as well.
okay, so let's each give a number then. What percentage? So if we're saying that it should be part of the job description, or it needs to be a top down. If it's culture, it has to be top down. We're going to commit to paying off technical debt, which means that the engineering team has to communicate what that is to business, and they need to talk. Shocking. Comes back to that chasm every time. So what percentage do you think an organization, each of you answer, should be, or the average engineer dedicating of their day-to-day in an enterprise, not at a baby startup where they have to deliver, what percentage should they be dedicating to technical debt? Free for all popcorn to each other.
I wouldn't say a hard number.
You have to, Preetha. Don't say it depends. No, it depends.
No.
Say it. Come on.
I'm not saying it's a hard number, but the reason because is it's the type of conversation I have day in and day out, and it's very hard to fix a number because it changes based on the team and the age of the product. So as like Adam pointed out, we do work with systems which has been several years old, and depending on the age of the software, your percentage changes. Like say, if you have a software that has been running from 2012, obviously the percentage you want to allocate is going to be like 60% for maintenance and 40% for upkeep. But if it's a 2-year-old software, you probably spend 80% on enhancements and a small portion, like 20% for essential maintenance. So it varies. I would say it varies based on the age of the product.
But
Fair
Darren is
enough.
going to agree with me though. Darren, I already know Darren's answer. It's 32.676, repeating, of course, is the percentage, right, Darren? That was what you had in your mind as well.
It's not far off. It is a very woolly question. It very much depends on context. But I think, to sort of stick my stake in the ground, I'd probably say 60-40, so 40% sort of maintenance BAU tech debt kind of feels about right. Granted, there are outliers, but that feels about right to me. But it very much depends.
Okay. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Preetha. And thank you, listeners. We do have more questions. They're mostly around metrics. So we're going to see you in the Slack community. We're going to continue the conversation at webinar Q&A. And that's a way to do it. And there's also a very vibrant technical debt community, sub-community or channel within the Lead Dev Slack community. Thank you, Harness, for hosting or co-hosting with me this conversation. And thank you, Lead Dev. Good luck, everyone, in your we didn't solve it. We weren't magic. But have a great day. That was very cool, Adam.
Thank you, everyone.
Good work for all.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank
bye.
you.